2018. Maine August 18th, South Arm Road, camping area. We left the truck camper in the Route 4 parking AT lot, and my sister and her family picked us up and dropped us off onto South Arm Road at around 7 o'clock p.m. We had set up our tent in a nice pine camping area off the side of the road. My sister's daughter, Paige, was interested in the trail and of camping on it. There was a large hiker trash can here near the campsite. We had a beautiful sunset of over the cliff heading south on the trail with the sounds of the stream behind our campsite, and I was so excited about being out here and back on the AT. It was getting dark now, and Dave was having a hard time getting the fire going in the stone fire pit. He had forgot his bellow to help get the fire going. Also, the woods here was wet, so the kindling for the fire was wet too. We had heard a crow laughing at us as Dave was getting frustrated trying to get the fire going. He did manage to get the fire going in the cooking stove, however, but it did not provide much heat as the temperatures was coming down. It was a beautiful night with clear skies and a bright half moon and no bugs after a 95 degrees humid weather all summer in Connecticut. It was perfect weather for sleeping. August 19th, South Arm Road north to a stealth site past Elephant Mountain. I had thought that it had rained last night because I had thought that I had heard raindrops on the tent early this morning. However, when I had opened the tent flap, I saw the sun rising and found out that it was just the pine needles falling on the tent. It was a nice camping night, one that you dream about. We headed out onto the trail at 9:30, and I had to hike with a crock on my left foot because I had injured it at work right before the trip. Someone was parked on the side of the road with a minivan that was doing trail magic when we were crossing the road heading north on the trail. We did not partake in the trail magic as we had just got onto the trail. The weather was perfect, a sunny 70-degree day with a light breeze and no bugs. The climb up to Old Blue Mountain was a little tough through a low pine tree area. We climbed over some boulders, and some of the boulders had metal bars in them to help hikers climb up the boulders. We reached Black Brook Overlook, which had a great view, and had met another couple hiking here. We took their picture at the view with their camera, and they had taken our picture with our camera. We did not sit here very long and descended on some more rocks and boulders, and then into another pine area. We went through a muddy area between the mountains. However, I was still happy being back in the Maine woods with the moss and lichens. We went through flat area with a lot of mud on the trail before we reached a stream where we filtered some water. I saw a nice stealth site here, but it was only 3 o'clock and I wanted to get over Elephant Mountain. We entered a marshy area with tree logs to cross over the water, and then we continued our climb up Elephant Mountain, now with full water bottles in our packs. We reached the top with a homemade bench made with tree logs, but it was not the top. I had learned when I had got home that the AT was moved off the summit and the old shelter was moved onto a side trail near the AT. I wanted to stay here longer and watch the sunset. I love the way the sun sets over the mountains, casting shadows over the valley and the sky turning a dark blue. But we had to continue on the AT and find a place to set up camp before it got dark. The quiet of the woods was incredible, and we saw a family of quail running on the trail and in the moss-covered woods. They made some interesting noises. We reached another stream and found a nice flat area to set up camp just before the Bemis Stream Trail at around 4:30. It was a small area right next to the trail. It is not one of our best sites as it's slightly slanted and the tent is in between two trees. We cooked our homemade dehydrated meal, sausages with tomato sauce, and went into the tent hoping for a good night's sleep. August 20th, stealth site north to a stealth site on First Mountain. We had a cool night with the temperature around 50 degrees. I was wearing a fleece and had a heating pad in my sleeping bag, and I had a good night's sleep. This morning we were woken up by a boisterous woodpecker hammering on a dead tree and the sun shining on our tent at 6 o'clock this morning. The dead tree was near the tent, and Dave said that he was not worried that the dead tree would fall on our tent. In the distance, a chattering squirrel joined in with the woodpecker to make sure that we were awake. We got out of the tent to make breakfast, and the sunrise was coming up through the pine forest, casting shadows on the ground. It was an ideal camping this morning, with a hot pot of oatmeal and a hot cup of coffee to get me ready for our climb over the Bemis Range. We headed out onto the trail and filtered our water at a small stream, just a short distance from our campsite. We had found a fresh bear footprint in the mud here on the trail right after we filtered our water. The bear must have walked right past our tent sometime last night or early this morning. This section started off with a lot of mud before reaching a rocky ledge, and the boulder scrambles up and down each of the summits. It was a mostly beautiful day, and we had some nice views of the sections of this Bemis Range that we had hiked over. We could see the many steep climb up and down over each of the summits that we had climbed up. The trail also had a lot of beautiful flat pine forest along the ridge line of the Bemis Range. We reached the Bemis Mountain Lean-To Shelter and found a female flip-flopper heading north in the shelter. We are running late on the trail, so we are not going to where we had planned to camp tonight. So our plan is to continue to hike until around 5 o'clock and then start looking for a place to set up camp. We filtered water here at the shelter and headed back out onto the trail. We reached a mostly ledge section of the trail on top of these mountains and reached Second Peak on the Bemis Range, and we could see Route 17 below us. We had gone 1.3 miles from the shelter, and the old railroad bed that we had planned to reach today was still 2 more miles from here. We could see Sabbath Day Pond from another viewpoint on this ledge walk that we had done over one-day hikes in 2008, which we will be doing again on this backpacking trip. It was slow going as we were getting tired with the full water bottles by the time that we reached First Mountain on top of this rocky ledge. This ledge walk had some short pine trees on it. We set up camp here, and tonight is the last night for good weather, as a storm is expected for tomorrow. We had found more blueberries up here that were ripe, and even Dave was going after them. They were very sweet and juicy. We heard some chattering red squirrels, but it was a mostly quiet night. I think that I will always remember this day and the great view of this ledge walk over the Bemis Range with its summits. It was a nice blue sky day with no winds, and the sunset up here was awesome. We got into the tent before dark and played some poker. We heard some hikers walking by with headlamps on after 1 o'clock, and one of them said that we were camping here. The other hiker said that no, that is not a campsite, and they continued on the trail. August 21st, stealth site on First Mountain North to a stealth site at the power lines after Sabbath Day Pond. It was a nice sunny morning, a little colder than yesterday, and we packed down for our hike today. It was a beautiful hike down this steep mountain on the rocky ledges. We reached a nice spring and filtered 2 water bottles for Dave's pack. We passed a hiker heading toward us that had told us that there was some trail magic ahead of us. We reached Bemis, Road, a dirt road, and the trail magic cooler from Greg and Jerry that was right before the road crossing. Inside, we found water bottles, a container of fruits, red grapes that I had picked to eat. They were cold and sweet. There was some snack bars inside, and Dave had picked up a Little Debbie fudge round. There was some peanut and jelly sandwich inside the cooler, and another male hiker arrived here and took 2 of the sandwiches. He told us that he was going to wait here and was saving a peanut and jelly sandwich for his wife, who was hiking slowly behind him. He told us that she had injured her foot on the hike, so she was moving very slowly. We reached a stream crossing, and I had to keep my injured foot out of the water to keep it from getting infected. I was lucky because there was rocks in the stream, and I was able to put my injured foot on the rocks and my other foot in the water. The male hiker passed us with no sign of his wife. Was he really hiking with his wife, or did he just take the sandwiches for himself, as there was only 2 in the container? We climbed up to Route 17, where there was an awesome view of the Bemis Range that we had just gone over. There were a lot of different kinds of wildflowers here, with the sun shining on the mountain behind them. What an awesome, picturesque view. We saw some hikers' stickers that adorned the guardrails near the road, and we started our redo of this section of the trail. It was 10 years ago, and we are back here again. Bates Ledge was interesting, and I did not remember this area when we were here before. I did remember the red roof building across from Long Pond. We reached Sabbath Day Pond, where we filtered both of our water bottles for when we reached camp. I remembered the wooden bench here next to the pond. We checked out the shelter quickly and heard a loon from the pond a short distance on the trail after we left the shelter. We went through a grassy area before we started our climb up to the power lines. The woods here felt very remote, and there were lots of blackberry bushes up here. We could see the clouds moving in, and the sky was becoming overcast and the wind was picking up. Another hiker had passed us and told us that cold rain was expected for tomorrow. We set up our camp in the woods next to the power lines as a cold wind had picked up. We sat here next to the tent with our cooking stove blazing. I sat here and did my notes for the day while Dave kept feeding the stove. The mountain that we are climbing up tomorrow has no name, and I decided to name it Mount Dave. We sat here as it started to get dark and listened to the wind and the crickets before going into the tent. This is our last night on the trail. During the night, I could hear the wind whipping the tarp with heavy rain pouring down. I was hoping that the tarp would hold up and would still be over the tent in the morning. August 22nd, stealth sight at the power lines north to Route 4. We woke up to pouring rain and lots of wind and no visibility. Luckily, the tarp that Dave had put up last night held, and we had stayed dry in here. We got out of the tent and everything was saturated. We packed up the tent and our gear before we took down the tarp and headed out to the trail. The trail was flooded, and it was still pouring out as we headed up the mountain. I tried to keep my injured foot dry and clean, and the Crocs had no traction on this wet trail. I had fell once on my stomach, and Dave had fell twice. This was one of the longest 7 miles that we had ever done as we headed out to our camper on the trail. We saw a quail in the woods on a flat pine section of the trail before we reached Little Swift River campsite, and we still had 4.8 miles left to reach our camper. We saw a larger salamander that we had never seen before here. It was black with yellow dots. I found out that it was a spotted salamander. After we left the campsite, we saw painted boulders on the side of the trail, counting down the last 3 miles to the road. Part of this section was recently maintained with raised hard dirt path lined with boulders so that it acted as a ditch on each side. We were soaked and so happy when we saw the camper in the parking lot. We had put a box of trail magic here for hikers before we were picked up. However, the box was gone when we came out. The MATC, Maine Appalachian Trail Club, had left a notice saying not to leave trail magic near the trail anymore. The sign was not there when we had dropped it off. I could not imagine spending another night in a wet tent, so we put the heater on in the truck and we moved to Caribou Valley Road, where we camped and had planned to climb over Crocker Mountain tomorrow. We had missed Crocker when we did this section, when we went over Sugarloaf Mountain in August 2015. August 23rd, Crocker Mountain. We woke up to a nice sunny day with blue skies. It was 70 degrees with a nice breeze, with no bugs, and it will be our best hiking day of this trip. Dave started from Caribou Valley Road, and he will be heading north. I will be driving over to the Route 27 AT parking area, where I will be heading south. I had on my AT music and was flying up Crocker Mountain. This section was mostly a green forest with a few mud pools. I came out of the mud and found some sticks on the trail that spelled out 2,000 miles. I guess that the thru hikers had a GPS and marked this spot with the sticks. I started a moderate climbing up and reached the pine forest, and shortly after, about an hour, I met up with Dave coming down the mountain. We sat on a log here and ate our lunch. I continued up to North Crocker at 4,168 feet and had a small view through a piney top. I then descended and then climbed up again about 1 mile to South Crocker at 4,010 feet. A trail went out to the view which overlooked Sugarloaf Mountain and Saddleback Mountain. I loved this view and the great weather that we had this afternoon. Another hiker had come to the view, and I had taken his picture with his camera, and he had taken my picture with my camera. He had given me a card with his blog address on it. I had seen a small squirrel or chipmunk up here later, and it had posed for a picture as I started my steep descent. The descent was hard over a lot of slanted boulders. However, the views were spectacular on the rock slide down, one of the best views on this trip. I reached the camper at 5:30,